Okay. According to a SEMrush study, for B2B businesses specifically, creating and posting more content and improving content was cited as the top tactics for gaining more organic traffic to their sites. Now, despite their efforts, B2B businesses do face challenges. Attracting quality leads with B2B content came in as the top challenge among respondents. Now, to me, this signals B2B businesses aren't interested in creating content for just anyone. They want their content to resonate with qualified prospects. And understanding the specific buyer's journey will help improve ROI as well. Now, there's plenty of opportunity to gain a competitive edge with your content marketing if you're a B2B business. Much less than half the respondents actually focus on audience research. Even less, 18%, said user experience was an important investment in 2023. So it would seem that there are definitely opportunities to take advantage of where your competitors are lacking. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if this is reflective of other people's experience, and who better to ask than someone who's actively involved with content and has successfully 3x revenue for clients as well. We'll do that in just a moment. Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshy and our guest today is Jeff Dolan. Jeff, you say you've always felt called to become a CEO and entrepreneur, and you've been working in the corporate healthcare space, SaaS sales world for most of your career before you saw a shift in how people were making buying decisions. You also noticed the growing importance of social media and digital marketing and decided to embrace it. In 2018, you started a marketing agency, found success after 3xing revenue for one of your first clients. You're now, of course, the CEO of Wave, a platform that turns audio into video for social media and social media growth. I'm curious, though, given all that you're involved in, including filmmaking, in fact, you're an award-winning filmmaker, was there a specific incident or event that really triggered this journey of combining creativity with more of the analytics and combining it into this digital marketing space?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Vinay. It's a pleasure. The event that kind of triggered something in me to realize that the game had changed was I was in corporate sales, selling SaaS to medical practices and health systems. And it became clear that just cold calling people, emailing, cold emailing, reaching out, developing relationships was an antiquated model. Most of the prospects I was calling on already had done their research in the market. They had already reached out to their peers. They've already seen the systems they were looking at buying prior to even talking to a salesperson. And so by the time they would talk to me, it was, we have already made our decision and now we're just going through formalities. And it was very little about how good I was as a salesperson. And so I quickly realized I had to get in front of that and be a digital marketer. And really, in the last, I would say, 5 years, it's really become about the share of mind, right?
Mhm.
Like, how much are your target audience or your community, how much are they thinking about you when they think about your category? And there's not a lot of ways to do it. There's not really magic in it, although all of us try to find the magic. It's you're either going to invest time or money, and you're trying to get the attention of people. You're trying to get attention of the specific people, like you were saying, that you can actually help. And if you can do it, if you're creative, then that cost, or I'm sorry, that return on investment
Mhm.
of your creative is going to return more for you. So the more creative and innovative you are with your content, the more it'll reach, and the less money that you'll invest. And so when I started seeing this dynamic happen where I almost wanted to be in the marketing team as well as the sales team, because let me generate my own leads and then I'll close them. And then, but they were very siloed off
Yeah.
in big corporate America. I was like, no, this is the sales team. This is the marketing team. We will pitch leads over to you. And that's the end of story. And I think a lot of companies struggle with this, where the sales guys actually want to create content. And then the
Mhm.
question is, you can't be funny. You can't be too funny. You might offend somebody. You might say something that's not on brand, and then we're gonna have to fire you or something. And so there's this chilling effect that happens where you're afraid to do anything and you don't want to be controversial. You have to represent the company. And so it's a very hard thing. And so what happens is you get this content that's bland, generic, no personality, and you're just stuck with the corporate sheen. And that definitely does not return well on your investment.
I'd love to dive into that a bit more, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
I would say on strategy, the strategy side. So there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of strategies out there. There's a lot of influencers and marketers that tout their strategy, mainly because they created a tool around it
Hmm.
or they created an ecosystem around it. And then when things change, it's very hard to reinvent yourself and say, okay, long webinars don't work anymore. Here's what works, or whatnot, whatever it is. We're going to do a 5-day challenge. We're going to do a funnel that does whatever. And so I think the times shift, change, and my ability to say, okay, here's what's working now, and here's what would work for your specific scenario. Because I think a lot of people, you get that shiny object syndrome where you're
Hmm.
like, I need to do everything and you do nothing,
Hmm.
right? And it's just very confusing for people. You don't know which strategy, which tools. You try one for a while, it doesn't work. And there's levels to all of this stuff, right? I In the last couple years, my eyes have been really open to some of the things that you can do in Facebook where a lot of people are like, Facebook is dead, don't worry about it. There's people crushing it on all platforms. It's
Hmm.
just how much do you know about how to optimize, advertise on each platform? And they're different
Hmm.
and they change, right? We're seeing a massive change right now in the Facebook Pixel potentially going away. GA4 came out, so there's a lot of people reeling around what Google's doing. So I think there's a lot of different things happening, and it's important to keep your eye on it. AI, of course, is coming on very strong. And so I would say looking at all the landscape, all the tools, all the strategies, how do we find the right combination for you?
Hmm. You make some great points there. Going back to what you were saying earlier about the problem with generic content, and also this trend wherein people get caught up with the latest platform, the newest technology, etc. Would you say that there perhaps is a constant that most people could tap into in order to keep them centered, irrespective of the environment that's changing around us all the time? If so, what would you describe it as?
Yeah, so the constant would be to show up online and have a very tight, what I call a feedback loop.
Right.
And so your customer feedback loop, if it's short and you have you're constantly showing up, then you are going to be able to adjust to whatever is happening. But it's hard to move a parked car,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So if you're just sitting in your car and you're like, I really want to go to the Grand Canyon, and you're
Yeah.
like, but I'm going to park here and look at my map. Ooh, this is a way that I could go. Ooh, this is a way I could go. You're still not going anywhere because you're parked.
Yeah.
So I think if you're constantly putting out content, that's going to teach you some things, right? It's
Hmm.
going to teach you how to optimize for the platform that you're on, and hopefully you chose the right one. But it really ultimately doesn't matter, because as you get feedback or you get negative feedback or you get crickets, that's an input, right?
Hmm.
That tells you, hey, this is not working. I'm not doing it right. I need to adjust something. I need to get better. But as you get better, as your content gets better, as you're posting more, as you're learning about your audience, as you're learning where they are and where they're not, who's commenting, if that's a pretty short cycle, you're going to get better quicker, faster, and you're going to find the right platform faster. And you will, if, just those two things: posting, getting feedback, adjusting. And as you adjust, you will be able to overcome all the changes that are happening.
Okay. And is that how you describe the short feedback loop, or is there a bit more to it?
Yeah. So the feedback loop is, for instance, if you post something
Hmm.
and you get no likes, no comments, no nothing, that's okay. That's one piece of content. But if you show up for 3 months
Mm.
and you post every day or 3 times a day, like a lot of people tell you to do, you're going to get comments at some point. Somebody's going to like something,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
If you absolutely get zero, and I'm talking zero, then your content is struggling big time. That's the input. But let's say after a month, you get a few comments, right? Hey, that was a really good point. I really like this topic. Can you talk more about that? Perfect. Yes, I will make more content about that. Let's
Mm,
talk more about that. Then you post that. And now instead of one comment, you get 3 comments. Okay, now I'm hitting a nerve. Let's create more content on that. Let's remix. Let's re-edit that post. Let's do more content on that. Let's
mhm,
post more on that. You start and get these feedback loops. So maybe the first comment took a month, but then the next comment took a day. So you just shorten your feedback loop to a day instead of waiting a month of
right.
posting content every day to get any sort of feedback on, is this good? Is this not good?
Mhm,
It's why you'll see a lot of YouTubers or influencers say, hey, if you like this, do this,
mm.
put a comment, do this. If you want my thing that I have, put this keyword. They're just trying to get engagement, to get feedback, to tell themselves, am I on the right track or am I way off?
Yeah. Brilliant point there. For newer entries into what could be a competitive landscape, is it just a feedback that is essential, or do we really need to hone in on the overall value proposition and test that out with a few people first of before we even look at building out content?
Yeah, it's a good point. So you're saying, do you work on the product first or do you work on the audience?
The product or the general value of what you're able to offer.
Yeah, so there's two types of value that you can offer. One is in the content itself. So the contextual content
Mhm,
of what you're putting out. What are you helping people to learn? What insights are you providing? What news are you providing? What opinions are you like what is the value in the actual content you're producing? That's one thing. And then usually if you're monetizing, you have a business behind what you're doing,
mhm,
right? You have a tool that you're selling or a program, a community, a course, like whatever you're selling, a product, something that you're pointing back to and saying, hey, if you want to go deeper, we're all doing this over here. Sign up here, right? There's a call to action. And that's typically like the back end monetization strategy of what you're doing. So it's really like the value you're providing your community and then the value you're providing through the content
mhm,
itself. And you want to align those where somebody starts you're getting their attention through the content and somebody starts getting ready to lean in and say, okay, I want to take the next step. How do I do that? Click below, buy my thing, whatever it is. And so that kind of cycle is where you want to do them, I would say, together if you can. But what most people do is they fall into the fallacy of the engineer trap where I'm going to go into my closet or I'm going to go into the shed out back and I'm going to tinker around until I build this amazing invention. And then I'm going to come out and I'm going to be squinting because it's so bright. And I'm going to say, hey, everybody, I built this time machine. Come try it out. And it's like crickets, right? Because you have no
mhm,
audience. And then there's another group that says, okay, forget that. I'm not even going to go into the shed and build anything. I'm going to sell and create attention and create all this content. And I'm going to have all these people sitting outside the shed saying, please make the time machine. And I'm going to go into the shed and I'm going to make it. And I'm going to be filming me make it and tell everybody all the updates on how I'm, making it. And then when I come out, everybody's cheering and throwing money at me to buy it. That's the ideal kind of situation that you want to have.
mhm,
And so a lot of people, and rightly so, say build the audience first. And in doing so, you will find out what they want you to build. In other words, what do they want to buy from you?
mhm,
And then that product will make itself clear. And now you have built in customers, where I think a lot of times you're trying to put a round peg in a square hole or whatever the saying is. You're trying to force it because you're like, I built this product. Okay, but that might have been relevant 3 years ago, but is it relevant today? Is it what the people want now?
mhm,
And so you're in this tough situation of trying to build attention around it. Now, a lot of B2B companies, especially if they're more entrenched or they are older, they have a problem of we have plenty of customers, we've got some stuff going here, but now we hear that we got to have this content or we got to do something online and we got to create videos or whatever. And they know that paid ads are getting really expensive and it's getting harder and harder to reach people because everyone's on their phone and they can't seem to get. How do we get our people's attention. And that's where you have to do that internal audit and say, who in my company is able to create good content? If not, I think what, speaking back to the chilling effect I mentioned earlier, what a lot of companies do that are, I would say, mid to larger, is they're going out and finding thought leaders and influencers that already have audiences.
Mm,
So if you go out as a company and you say, "Hey, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to do all this stuff." You can go find an influencer that is good at it, that already has an audience of your customers,
mm,
of your future customers, and say, "Hey, how can we partner together to create content that is valuable, so that when the customers hear the content, they say, "Oh my goodness, who is this guy? I want to find out more. I want to work with this guy. What is he selling? Oh, he's selling something that helps me." So that's how, as a B2B company, if you're not good at content and you don't have all the money to spend on ads, or you're not putting the right kind of creative in your ads to attract the right customers, then you need to partner with somebody that can do that.
mm,
And so that's where a lot of the opportunities are right now for individual influencers to pretty much become what I would call freelance salespeople,
mm.
right? They work for themselves, they create their own
Yeah.
content. They don't necessarily have products other than, hey, I'm highlighting these other companies and products that you might want or you might like because I know you and I'm creating content for you.
Hmm, brilliant. For some people, though, I was wondering if you could share insights into perhaps the pitfalls of trying to emulate the success of, I'm just going to use the podcasting space, people like Oprah and Joe Rogan, for example, or Tim Ferriss, who have very well established track records and audiences, and the temptation is to go big they do. What would be your advice to those folk?
Yeah, so I always use the analogy of an artist, like a band or a musician or a singer. And the analogy is, if I go on the radio and I sing like an artist, that a famous artist, the audience that's listening is going to say, "Oh, that sounds like
Mhm,
Adele," or "That sounds like U2," or whatever it is. Those are artists I already know about. So I'm just going to go listen to those artists, or I'm going to mistakenly think that artist had a new song out or something.
mhm,
Right. So you automatically get downgraded to a non-event. Whereas if I hear something unique and I'm like, wow, that's a unique voice, or that's a
mhm,
unique song, or wow, the lyrics are amazing, I'm going to lean in and say, who is that? And now I'm a new fan of this new thing that never was there before. And I think podcasters fall into that trap because they know that, okay, this is what's working. So I'm just going to do that. And I would say, and I say this to artists too, it's okay to emulate when you start,
mhm,
because you're going to find out what your voice is by modeling the greats. So if you practice and you practice your guitar like your favorite band or your favorite guitarist, or and then you sing like your favorite singers or whatnot, you will get better. But don't expect to be any greater than the people that you're emulating, right?
mhm,
Or even to get that much notoriety. Where you really separate yourself is when you are unique. And so we already have a Joe Rogan, we already have an Oprah, we
mhm,
already have all these podcasters that are famous for what they do,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
There was a new podcaster that just went super viral. I forget her name right now, but she essentially almost was like a comedy podcast who was interviewing all these famous rappers and people like Drake. And the only way you could get on her show is if you were friends with her on Instagram. So it became this like celebrity inside thing of whether you could get on the
mhm,
podcast or not. And then she completely just roasted you and did all these funny things, almost like between two ferns kind of thing. And it was just funny. It caught on and it was unique. Like,
mhm,
here you have this, I think she was a mom. Anyway, she was this young lady that just came out of nowhere. She's funny, quirky, had a unique angle on it, and there was no one else is doing that, right? No one else is having these conversations where she just asks for things like cars, or how much money do you make, or just crazy questions that you wouldn't ask on a podcast, right? And so when you come across a podcaster like that or a podcast like that, you have to put it in a different category in your mind, and now you're making room for it because it's new. And so I would say that emulate to start, but then find your own voice as quickly as possible.
Certainly. And with this idea of finding your own voice, uh, are there particular guidelines that you would recommend that we use to figure that out? Because it can be a lot of trial and error. Is there any way that you would recommend to hasten the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one of those things where if you've ever watched Idol, whether it's American Idol or any whatever country you're in, the Idol concept, typically the judges encourage whatever makes you unique and tries to make it to the nth degree,
Mhm.
right? They try to overdo whatever the thing is that makes you unique. So I'm just going to make this up, but if you had big poofy hair, they want bigger hair, right? If you like Elvis, they want you to go crazy on you dressing like Elvis, become the bigger than Elvis, whatever. Like they want you to go to the nth degree of that. If you have a raspy voice, they want to hear that in your
Mhm.
songs, right? If you are into pop music, they want you to be that, right? So as a podcaster, and you also have to mix in what do you like? What are you good at?
Mhm.
I think a lot of times people try to please others with what they think others like and they ignore their strength. So if you're super strange in certain areas where you're like, I'm a podcaster, but I really like playing the kazoo or something. I've never heard of a podcast where a guy just busts out a kazoo and does a transition with a kazoo. And I'm just making this up, but what if between every transition you're like, ooh, and now we're in this new setting, right? Just that alone, somebody is going to say, who is this guy? Like he's doing his own transitions with a kazoo. Like what? And then if it's half good, now I have a story to tell somebody. Man, I
Mhm.
listen to this really good podcast. The guy uses a kazoo. It's hilarious. Like he transitions all his like segments with a kazoo, right? So whatever it is, do it more,
Mhm.
right? So whatever it is, if you're into something crazy, like there was a guy that I just found out about his podcast the other day. It's like the smoked barbecue podcast or something. But anyway, he's like grilling out on his grill while he's interviewing you.
Wow.
And so it's almost like a reality, like he's like showing you what he's cooking up, like it's a cooking show, but while he's talking to you about business. Those are the kind of things that you just have to experiment with. Some of them will flop, right? Some of them won't, but that's the great thing about the feedback loop. If you start doing that and you give it a chance, don't just do it for one or two times, but do it for a month or two, three, six, right? You do it, you give it a real shot, you try to get better at it, you perfect it, it becomes your thing, no one else is doing it, and nobody cares. Okay, season two.
Mhm.
Now I'm not the kazoo guy. Now I'm doing something else, right? If the barbecue thing doesn't work, it's okay. Who cares? I'm doing the next thing. But that constantly showing up
Mhm.
and you're constantly changing and evolving into the person you want to be, I think that's how you find it. You don't necessarily find it by just sitting and planning and thinking and I'm going to come up with this brilliant thing because by then somebody else will already have done it and moved on, right?
Right, right. Absolutely, and great advice there. I'm also curious about whether we should consider things like passion. I think you've touched upon long-term sustainability, but what about passion? With something like the smoked barbecue grill, obviously there's a bit of passion in there. Is that something that we should factor in and be willing to be vulnerable enough and to put ourselves out there in that way?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of people say follow your passion. And I think in the last year or so, I've seen folks come out and say, no, that's horrible advice. Don't
Mhm.
follow your passion. Follow what the market
Yeah,
wants, and then you'll be rich. So I think there's a balance there between is your passion something that enough people want to know about or learn about? So in the kazoo example, I don't know how many kazoo players are out there that would be interested, but if you really were going all in on kazoos and you had the most unique model of kazoo at the right note hum and it had a certain whatever collector's edition, this famous kazoo player played it, you will get an audience for that.
mhm.
Is that the audience that is going to sustain you and help sponsor the Kazoo International Federation of Kazoo Players is going to sponsor you? Like you're going to get invited to speak at the kazoo conferences, right? Like
Mhm.
you're going to be a special golden plated kazoo is going to be given to you in honor of your podcast. These are things that you can play out as you choose. Okay, I'm passionate about this thing, but it's worth a shot at it, right? It's
Mhm.
worth trying it. It's worth seeing how far it can go if you can sustain it. I think
Mhm.
what a lot of people fall in the trap of is I'm passionate about this, therefore I have to make money at this,
Mhm.
right? And so they force it, and then all of a sudden they find that they're not passionate enough about it
Right.
because now they have to work. So let's play out the example. I'm passionate about kazoos. I'm not really, but we're playing
Mhm.
along. Let's say that I was the kazoo podcaster and I'm like, hey, I am going to go all in on this. And let's say everything that I just said happened for real. And now you have the golden kazoo that you're playing on your podcast. Like you have the sponsorship by the National Federation of Kazoo Players. I just made that up too. I don't know if it's real. If it is real, then free advertising. So you go all in on it. And then you're like, you know what? I don't want to be the kazoo guy anymore. And you see this from Vanilla Ice, Carrot Top, like all these actors or famous musicians or whatnot. They might get to a point where they're just like, I was a cultural like icon at one point for
Mhm.
something, and I don't want to be that anymore.
Mhm.
And I don't want to keep showing up as the kazoo guy anymore. And so you got to be careful because can you sustain it? And then if you're forcing that one thing to make money, are you going to still be passionate about it? So the other side to the way to look at it is if you're passionate about it and you want to just do it for fun, great. But then you make money over here at something you're not as passionate about. And you can swap that out with whatever you want to that can
Mhm.
make money and sustain you, but you're doing your passion over here. So I think you can also think about it from the standpoint of you can do your art and you can make money and they don't have to be the same thing.
Mhm. Right. Brilliant. Just switching track a little bit and thinking about B2B businesses and in particular C-suite executives. I'm curious if you could walk us through some of the challenges that you find these folk face, especially in managing their social media presence while leading their companies effectively.
Yeah, this is what I'm dealing with right now. If you're a CEO, especially of a tech company, I think there's a lot of I wouldn't say pressure, but I would say
Mhm.
expectation that you should be showing up online and you should be an influencer of some sort, leading your company and being a voice and being out there. I
Mhm.
think it's the role of a CEO to set the vision and lead. And so the best way to do that online is to create content. And there's been some really great examples of this, right? Where you have a CEO that is out front and center. The Basecamp co-founders, they're excellent at this, right? There's a lot of folks that write books. There are many things that a CEO can do in a day to day. And then to have on top of all the duties of running a company, it's I've got to do podcast interviews or I got to create content or I got to be on TikTok or whatnot. And so I think it's going to be different for each CEO. How comfortable are you to do that? Some CEOs have a whole marketing team where they're like, look, just you handle all the marketing. I got to run the company. I don't have time to do this. And you'll never hear from those
Yeah.
CEOs. They're running their businesses and you never know who they are. I think it's a philosophy thing. Some companies feel like they need a personality to show up. Others, they don't want to be visible, right? They want their product to speak for themselves. Product led marketing, they want to demo their product. Here's what the product can do. And there's a lot of controversy around if you do become the face of the company and then you leave, does that hurt the brand? Do you become the brand? Right. And so these are really tough questions right now. As a CEO, do you build your personal brand?
Mhm.
So you're building the company brand and then you're building your personal brand. I typically recommend people to do both because obviously you as a company or you as a person are going to last longer than a company typically. There's very few companies that last over 100 years. Unless you're sitting on the next IBM, you're probably going to last longer.
Mhm.
So your personal brand then becomes an asset for whatever company that you're working for. If you build a brand as a leader and then somebody's paying attention to that content and they're following your personal brand and then you go lead another company, there's going to be a built-in audience that says, "Hey, I really like how this guy leads and how
Mhm.
he shares information. I'm going to follow him and I'm going to see his next gig, or I might even give him his next gig. So those, I think, are assets for you as a leader of your company to do. But I think it's all over the board as far as your view on how you want to lead and be visible.
So for similar folk, C-suite executives who are perhaps investing in, say, a podcast, for example, what would be some indicators that their unique style or delivery could become their niche?
It's a good question. What indicators? I think just doing it. I think it's pretty clear
Hmm.
when you watch a podcast whether the executive is very uncomfortable and awkward or
Right.
they're a natural.
Yeah.
Right? I've seen just horrendous experiences where I try to get an executive to do a podcast and it's like pulling teeth and it's okay, this is definitely not your medium. We are scrapping this totally and I recommend you write a newsletter or I recommend you have your other team members do it. And I think there's really good examples too of folks that there's somebody on their team that is very fun to talk to,
Mm.
right? Maybe it is their marketing leader, maybe it's their CFO, right? Maybe he bucks the trend and he's a really funny CFO. There, whatever, whoever's on your team that you feel comfortable doing that, it might even be somebody that is not typically in the spotlight. You
Mhm.
might have an HR person, or you might have a salesperson, or a biz dev person, right? That is really funny and they have a really quirky way of saying or explaining things, or they know your product inside and out. You can make them your star as well.
Mm.
So it doesn't always have to be the leader of the company, but it sometimes it helps if it is an exec C suite, just because the staff feels like, hey, they're involved and they care, and I'm seeing them a lot. It's when the old factory days, if the executives never went down on the floor in the manufacturing floor, all the workers are like, what is he doing? He's sitting up in his ivory tower, like we're doing the real work.
Yeah. With the increasing adoption of AI and this talk around digital clones as well, would you say that they would actually be able to help CEOs and business leaders with their content and brand presence?
Yeah, it's a great question. So digital clones are coming on pretty strong and fast right
Mhm.
now. The ability to record your voice and your likeness in a video and have the AI from text
Mhm.
craft your clone to say on video what it is you want to say using your mannerisms, using your voice. It's actually why the Hollywood folks were striking,
Mm.
right? Because part of that strike was, hold on, wait a minute, you can just copy me and then use me as an actor forever,
Mm.
and I don't make money off that. And some of my Hollywood friends were telling me that they've been doing that for a long time, especially with extras. And so now, like the A-listers are figuring it out. I think clones is definitely going to be a thing. The early stuff that I've seen was not that good, and so it was clearly doctored. You clearly, the mouth movements were weird, the mannerisms were too stiff. You could just tell it was not real. But I think the latest things that I'm seeing coming out, and probably by the time folks start listening to this episode, the technology's there. In the last couple of weeks, I've seen stuff that has come out where I'm like, man, I can't even tell if that's real or not. So it's going to start getting really hard to tell. And and if that's the level of quality, then it really is going to come down to what are you saying? The quality of your ideas, the quality of the information you're sharing.
Mhm.
If I'm watching a news video or a news podcast or listening to something that is cloned, do I care if it's just giving me the news? Nah, maybe not. If I just want unbiased, straight
Mhm.
news, I might not care in the delivery. But if I'm listening to an opinion cultural podcast talking about certain artists or certain figures in the public, like I want their opinion, I want them to laugh, I want jokes, I want stuff, and AI hasn't been able to do that yet. So I think that's the humanity side of it is going to be really hard to clone and replicate. But I do think some of the more informational things can be replaced. You'll have to experiment with it. All the data and all the experiments I've done, my audience at Wave does not like it at all.
Hmm.
They say things like, my ears get fatigued, right? I might be able to listen to a 20-second TikTok video with an automated voiceover or something,
Yeah.
but man, if it's like a half-hour podcast, forget about it. The other dynamic that I think is really interesting is this idea of, and I don't know about you, I'm going to ask you here in a second, but do you listen to podcasts on 1.5x or 2x or YouTube videos?
YouTube videos, yes, not podcasts.
Okay. So I listen to them 1.5,
Yeah.
1.75, 2x. That, even though it modulates the audio to sound still like their
Mhm.
voice, it is fast. It's changing their voice to be artificial.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, why am I doing that? Am I doing that just to get information? Mostly. Am I learning something at that speed? Nah, mostly. But it is a different sound. It's not just their natural sound. And so I have to ask myself, like, okay, if we replace that unnatural sped up voice with just an AI voice, are you even going to notice at 2x speed? So I think there's an interesting, and I might just be weird and type A and nobody does this, but I have to ask that question. And so I think time will tell. How good is the AI going to get? How many people are going to start employing this to replace themselves in their content? I think some people can get away with it in little bits and pieces right now, but for the most part, you're not going to win cloning yourself and just telling your clone to do all the content. There's still that humanity part of it that is to be figured out.
You make a good point there because I often find there's a lot of conversation around building up the brand, whether it be the company brand, personal brands, etc. Yet I don't find too many conversations around inviting your customers to be part of the conversation. And I'm
Mm.
curious, what is your take on that? Is that something that you should tread carefully with approach that you take, or is that something you don't even touch other than maybe having testimonials or the occasional case study?
Yeah, I think they're great. I think I feel guilty because I should do more of it. Like, I have conversations with my customers all the time, but a lot of times it's almost an invasion of privacy. Of, hey, I'm recording this. I'm going to put this on my socials. They're like, whoa, I'm not. I don't want to do that. And especially with Wave customers specifically, because we turn your audio into video,
Yeah.
and the video is not your face on video, and that's the point. They don't want their face on the video. But yeah, I think it's super important, especially in a day and age when uh, the information can be relayed very simply, and it's hard to know who to trust now, right? You don't know, is this fake news? Is this legit news? Is this where's the bias? Where are you coming from? I think it's really interesting to hear testimonials that are not just one-sided. In other words, it's a conversation,
Mm.
and you can sense from a conversation whether it's real or authentic, rather than, I'm a paid actor and I'm saying this. There's a lot of fraud in that too, where you just hire people to say good things about your company. Okay. But if you have testimonials where you're like asking questions, how are you using this? What are your tips? The back and forth really lends itself to more authenticity.
Mhm.
And I think that's super powerful. If you were listening to your peer talk about the positives and negatives of something and showing you, that's huge. And I think if you can do more of that, absolutely. One of the things I did at one of the companies that I worked with was we actually interviewed customers, right? We interviewed people on the podcast that were members of our community, and we learned their stories, where they came from, how they built their business. People were crying. This is like vulnerable city, right? This is like everyone is just sharing all their guts and their past and their dreams, and it was very powerful.
Mhm.
And I think that those kind of conversations really lend themselves to saying, hey, we care about you. We're not just this company. Like, we really care about our customers and what we can do to help you achieve your dreams and overcome your obstacles and whatever you're dealing with. And so those kind of testimonials really can be powerful for sure.
And it's not just about the testimonials. I believe they also really help with the buyer's journey. In that you're having people who resonate and are very much like others who would be a good customer, especially if you're looking at higher value products or services, then
Right.
it makes a really good fit. That's brilliant. From what you were saying, the word authenticity comes to mind, and I'm curious, how should we look at this perception of authenticity, especially from say, a CEO role who is managing their personal brand and social media presence, as well as the overall brand of the company? What do we need to be aware of as we look at being authentic and being our true selves, as well as portraying the human side of the brand as well, the company brand?
Yeah, it's super hard because right out of the gate, most people are skeptical. I just saw this comedian roasting different people at levels in a company. He was saying, like, I think it was like the salesperson, you don't trust the salesperson, they're liars. And then he kept going in the company. It was like HR. And then in the comments, they were like CEO, like just they all are liars. And so I think there's a perception, the bigger the company, the more people lie,
Hmm.
and they lie about their products or companies or whatever. And so I think automatically you're going to be facing this doubt and this skepticism. And it is hard because when things go wrong, people are looking to see how you're going to react, right?
Hmm.
If you're not perfect, how are you going to lie about it? So you got hacked or something, or you've dropped the ball, or the servers went down, or God forbid Amazon on the whole East Coast went down, right? But they're blaming you. Like, how are you going to interact with this? And how are you going to share that with your customers and message that? And so you're trying to balance the company and the brand and be positive while also being authentic and sharing like the hard things in a way that customers will understand. And sometimes they won't understand and they'll just roast you. And you got to be okay with that too. So I think there's a fine line. There's CEOs that I've seen where there's some cringe stuff, right? You probably didn't need to share that much information, like TMI on that, or hey, it's not relevant.
Hmm.
Nobody wants to know about your personal life in that area. Like, just pass on that. So I do think a lot of the leaders sometimes need some coaching on it if they are just not sure, especially if they don't have any sensitivity around social situations, right? On if you just went to a party, right? Mixed company, you don't know the backgrounds of the people involved in the party, you don't know their backgrounds, where they're coming from. There's certain things that you just don't say, right? And there's even laws around this, right? You don't run into a theater and yell fire and things like that. So there's certain sensitivities that you have to have that go along with authenticity, where, and Brene Brown talks a lot about this as far as vulnerability. Vulnerability is something that you can share that attracts people to you because most people want to help.
Hmm.
And so when they hear that you're struggling with something, they lean in and they say, "Oh, I want to hear this." And that brings connection, right? And part of authenticity is that vulnerability, but the question is, how vulnerable do you want to get?
Hmm.
And does that serve the greater company and mission of what you're trying to do? Does that serve your customers? In some businesses it does. In some businesses you're just shooting yourself in the foot and it doesn't help you at all. So I do think it requires a level of self-awareness, social awareness, and some are good at it, some are not.
Okay, something to approach with caution.
Yes,
Yeah, certainly.
for sure.
Looking to the future, I'm curious, what would you say insights that we should be aware of, especially when it comes to AI and technology in general, as they reshape the landscape, especially in the content creation space in the coming years?
Yeah, so it's definitely coming on strong in almost all the apps and all the tools, all the social content tools. There are AI sections or AI parts of the code that allow you to generate different things, whether it's text or video content. Experiment with it. right now. Just see what you like, what you don't like. You, all of us are also consumers of
Mhm.
the same content. So I think it's going to be interesting because this is the first time where a technology has come out that's basically on the level of the internet. It's that big,
Mm.
right? It's a game changing technology that is not going away. It's going
Yeah.
to affect every part of technology that we see. It's going to change lives. It's going to replace workers, certain workers. It's going to create new jobs. It's going to do all these things. And so we have to see what is going to help us as content creators, what is not going to help us. I think the deep fake stuff is really confusing for a lot of people. Now we don't know if videos are doctored,
Mhm.
right? If I can pull voices from famous people and have them say things
Yeah.
and have it look real, nobody knows what to believe anymore. And I believe it was a early executive at Microsoft back in 2008 or 9 that warned of this, that we would
Mhm.
one day reach a point where no one believes anything they see online. And it's one of the reasons why somebody like Elon Musk is a meme lord. He's the meme guy. It's okay, you may not believe everything, but look at this. This is funny. And that's undeniable, right? Like you're going to laugh at this thing, whether it's true or not. And so I think that's a category of content that I think you still can aim for if you have the right sensibility around it and sensitivity around it. I think that could be a really good way to go. But again, AI is not great at that. So it's still one of those. Now, for a lot of the just plain informational things, there's a lot of people that are automating that, right? Like I just got an email, inbox email, what's it, from LinkedIn. This guy was using AI to basically have his video replace his lips to say my name, replace the website behind him to be my website, right? So these are tools that are happening right now that people are using AI for in sales and marketing, where
Mm.
it's customized one on one marketing. Where a human before would have to say, "Hi, Vinay, I looked at your website,"
Yeah.
and now an AI can look at your website, replay and replace and generate the video, the sales video looks like it's personal to you, that I spent time doing it, but I didn't. It was an AI. And now even the customers, the prospects are going to be asking themselves, is this real? Did this guy really? And before AI, they had the engines where the guy would write on a whiteboard your name and you'd see these messages and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
did he really write that on there? Like some people did, but some people it was just like a fake video replacement of your name. But all these kind of things people are going to try. Some of it's going to work, some of it's not. Some people are going to get really good at it, make a lot of money off of it. Some people are not. But it really is, I think all of us are having to figure out like how can we use it. I definitely encourage everybody to try it.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things that if you look at the kind of adoption curve, the middle to the end of the adoption curve, they haven't even tried it yet.
Mhm.
They're just waiting for AI to settle down so that they can use it.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is when Google and Gmail and Yahoo and the iPhone and when all the tools that we traditionally use on a day-to-day basis start just incorporating AI into it, then everyone can say I use AI, right?
Mm.
And oh yeah, I use AI, and so everyone will just be like, yeah, it's what we do now.
Yeah.
It's how we do things. So I think it's going to be so pervasive that everyone will be using it whether they want to or not.
Mhm.
It's like the conversation that you would have with your mom or dad back when Facebook was tagging everybody in all the pictures, and your parents would probably say, I'm not on Facebook. Yes, you are. Yes, you are, mom. Yeah. Everyone's already tagged you. You're already on Facebook, but I don't have an account. Yeah, but you're still on there.
Lots of insights there to mull over and factor in. I know we've covered a fair bit of ground, but would you say that there's perhaps a couple of areas in this intersection of creating content, marketing, and certainly branding as well that you find doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
Mm. That's a good one. Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now that is not getting airtime is the idea of indirect attribution, or what's called dark social.
Yeah.
And so a lot of executives are making decisions around data. They really love data. Oh, I got to have data.
Yeah.
All right, what's the data? Even myself, I got to see the data on that.
Yeah.
But the hard part about all this content stuff is there's no direct attribution that you can tie to a lot of the content that you're making. And I even did this study with one of the podcasts I did where I had any link that I mentioned in the podcast went back to this one stat counter, and that would track everything. So I could at least get some trajectory to try to triangulate, did this come from? So I knew anything I mentioned in the podcast all went back through this one tracking
Mhm.
mechanism. So I knew that anything that came from these websites I could tie to revenue, but it was super hard to track.
Mhm.
And when I was asked like how much revenue, like after a year of doing it, it's like how much revenue could we attribute because we did the podcast, and I gave a number, and it was like okay, like not that exciting. But when you look at the lift overall of the business, it absolutely helped. And so if you say there's no magic bullet, but the dark social things that happen that you can't track are like somebody listened to a podcast, right? Maybe they're listening to this podcast. They hear something that is an insight that they're like, oh man, that's super good. They maybe send a link to the podcast, maybe even a timestamp, right, in a text message to their buddy
Mhm.
at another company, let's say. That person then screenshots it, attaches it in a Slack channel that they're in to a group of people of, let's say, 5 people. And somebody in another country on the other side of the world gets that screen image and says, oh man, and then types that into Google, finds the podcast, listens to it, goes to the notes, the show notes, clicks the link, goes to that website, opts in. Okay. Now, if you're the owner of that website, how do you know where that person came from?
Yeah.
You have no idea where they came from. But you know what you're gonna attribute it to? Google. You're gonna say, "Oh man, this was a Google search. They found my website on Google." No,
Yeah.
they just use Google as a way to not have to copy paste the link. So I think the dark social is something that a lot of people are not talking about. And so what that means for executives running businesses is that you have to do content almost in a black box, right? You invest in it as a long-term play, knowing that it'll give a general lift to your company if done well,
Mhm.
and look for things like engagement, look for things, the comments, the likes, the shares, the saves, and then ask. I think that's the other thing. So that person that opted in the example I gave, they opted into the website, where did you hear about us from?
Mhm.
They won't say Google.
Yeah.
They'll say word of mouth. They'll say a friend, a colleague referred me. They'll say something else, but they're
Mhm.
certainly not going to say Google, right? And so if you ask directly detailed information and you don't just give them like, did you find me on Google? Did you find me on this podcast? Did you, right? You actually give them an open way to say it
Mhm.
where they can give you more detail. I think you'll see qualitatively that it's helping, and then over time you'll see whether it's a net effect positive.
Brilliant. And if you were, just to wrap up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Top takeaway would be to produce content, track the feedback, try to get the feedback loop
Mhm.
as tight as possible, and put it in your budget. Make it a part of your everyday running a company. It's no longer optional. If you're not online, you don't exist. If you're not showing up regularly with content, you really don't exist. It's very hard to grow a company these days if you're not doing any content.
Brilliant. And if listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, so I do a biweekly newsletter at wave.co, wave.co. And I also have my personal website at jeffdolan.com.
Okay, we'll include links to that in the show notes. Jeff, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Vinay. It's been fun.